Hello and welcome you all to the Atlantic Council. I'm Fred Kemp, President and CEO, and it's my pleasure to welcome Scott Nathan, Chief Executive Officer of the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation. Scott, on behalf of the Atlantic Council and our Africa Center and our Geoeconomic Center, who are hosting today's conversation, thanks for joining us during this this week's World Bank IMF spring meetings. It's a great follow-on as well to our meeting last week with Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. So thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
Scott was appointed by President Biden and confirmed by the Senate February 9th of this year, and he brings extensive experience across public and private sectors to the role. Most recently, he served as senior advisor to the White House Office of Presidential Personnel after working on the Biden-Harris presidential transition appointments team. Prior to that, he served during the Obama administration as the associate director for the general government programs at OMB. If I went through his entire CV, we wouldn't have time for any of the conversation. So Scott, I'm not going to do that, but it is a rich list of public sector and private sector accomplishments. I don't know how many people you in the audience, how many people you know that have done both Harvard Law and Harvard MBA, but it's just a stellar background. I'm going to moderate the first half of today's event, and then I'm really delighted that Ambassador Ramayad, the director of our Africa Center, will do the second half. So Scott, let's jump right in. We're all watching with horror every day as we see more of Russian President Vladimir Putin's unprovoked and brutal war in Ukraine. And we at the Atlantic Council feel it's underscored generational threats to the principles and values of the international liberal order, which has preserved peace and prosperity for the last 7-8 decades. And that there's just much more at stake in Ukraine than Ukraine itself. Obviously, the DFC had a lot of plans, a lot of things underway when this crisis took place. But I think it'd be interesting for our viewers to hear not only a little bit about the DFC and how you view its work and role, but then how the Ukraine crisis fits into that and what adjustments you've made due to that as well.
Well, thanks, Fred. And I should say first, thanks for the opportunity to participate in the Atlantic Council event here. And thank you for your participation on our Development Advisory Council. It's something that was started when DFC started a little over 2 years ago. And you've been on it from the beginning, adding your wisdom and your counsel, and I just wanted to thank you for that.
It's honor, Scott. Thank you.
Yeah. To your question, it's obvious that what's happening in Ukraine, it just causes everybody to reconsider their priorities. But the DFC, our primary mission is to mobilize private sector capital to address the pressing development needs of the globe around the world, and that hasn't changed. We of course are sharpening our pencils, thinking about what exposure we do have in Ukraine, which is considerable. The DFC was founded 2 years ago. One of our predecessor agencies, OPIC, had done considerable business in Ukraine. We currently have more than $750 million of exposure in Ukraine. So our first order of business was making sure that our counterparties, our investees, our clients had all the support that they needed. We've set up an internal task force, making sure that we could provide support to them, any forbearance, see if there were ways that we could extend, further credit or support to help them out in this incredibly difficult time. We're also focused on seeing what we can do going forward to address issues such as this planting season, where financing is one of the issues, with making sure that Ukrainian farmers have access to capital to finance seeds, equipment, diesel, fertilizer. and we're working hard on that. In addition to talking to potential counterparties in neighboring countries to address some of the energy security issues that are put in sharp relief by this current crisis. All that said, while we're able to really focus on the implications of the Ukraine issue, we continue to do our business around the world, whether it's in Latin America, Africa, Southeast Asia, et cetera. This is, it's critical that we not lose our focus while still addressing the issues raised by the Ukraine crisis.
So Scott, as I said, you were confirmed February 9th, so still very, very new in the job, but you just mentioned you will continue to do the work that you're doing. As you come in, what do you see as, obviously there's just a lot of work that DFC is doing, but if you're seeing top 2, 3 priorities, how do you look at that?
Yeah, so, if I think about institutionally what our top priority is, it's really to make sure that this organization, which started its life in December of 2019, has the capacity and capabilities to fulfill our mission. The BUILD Act, the act that Congress passed that created the DFC, refocused our mission compared to our predecessor agencies on the poorest countries of the world, but also gave us the mission of advancing the foreign policy interests of the United States. We mobilize private sector capital to private projects that achieve those development objectives, but we do have to be guided by the foreign policy interests of this country and look to advance those objectives too. So I'm very focused on making sure that we have the human resources and the financial capacity to do that. Our organization has grown quite a bit in the last 2 years, and that growth trajectory actually will accelerate. We want to make sure that we're able to support the Biden-Harris administration, President Biden's B3W initiative, which is really focused on the infrastructure gap, the $40 trillion infrastructure gap in the developing world, and whether that's climate, information communication technology, healthcare, advancing the interests and equality of women and girls. These are all high priorities for us around the globe.
I'll come back to B3W in a minute, but first let me refer to the speech of Treasury Secretary Yellen last week, where she talked about how much of the US government's work during this week's spring meetings of the IMF World Bank would be focused on ensuring developing countries can weather the shocks caused by the economic impacts, which they were already feeling from the pandemic, but of Russia's war in Ukraine. And I think we're seeing more stress on energy and more stress on food prices. Some people even talking about dangers of starvation coming out of this. You talked about Ukraine itself. Can you share with us what DFC is thinking about our partners in the developing world at this moment?
Yeah, so this food insecurity crisis that seems headed our way because of the crisis in Ukraine has multiple levels. I think I mentioned a little bit what we're trying to do in Ukraine. Of course, beyond planting, and that will be the harvesting and the storage and transportation of grain produced in Ukraine. That really is, I think most people know, is a critical part of the World Food Program and the grains that are exported to the Middle East, to South Asia, and to Africa. So we're doing what we can to help with that. But as you point out, this crisis will be felt throughout the developing world. Rising fertilizer prices cause production potential issues in the developing world. Food insecurity and agribusiness was part of our focus prior to this crisis. So we're doing what we can to support projects that enhance yields, improve access to good technology, good equipment for increasing yields. We're looking at agricultural projects around the world. It is important to point out, however, that the DFC is not a relief agency. We don't have aid capacity to give. We can make technical assistance grants to make projects more bankable, but we do need private sector actors, commercial and bankable projects in order to make impact. So we're working with our interagency partners in the US government who have the tool set to do the most immediate kind of relief. And we're looking at creating more sustainable long-term solutions through partnership with the private sector.
No, that makes perfect sense to me. So going back to B3W, the infrastructure gap in the developing world that you talked about. This question is really about China. In a world where some fear, some just predict that it's breaking down a bipolar world, you're also seeing some signs of even a new non-aligned world. But in any case, Russia's isolated itself from the West. China's making difficult decisions regarding Ukraine. What's still out there is the Belt and Road Initiative. And I just wonder how you look at DFC's work in the context of China's development and infrastructure aspirations around the world.
Well, it's clear that one of the reasons why DFC was created with strong bipartisan support in Congress was concern about the Belt and Road Initiative and other sort of state-directed sort of financing that really is questionable in terms of the productivity for the developing world. We're looking to offer an alternative, a sort of more transparent, more focused on standards, environmental, social, governance standards, transparency, openness. These are the values that are important to the United States, to our economy, are important for us as we engage abroad. And it really is the core of the idea of finding private sector partners, mobilizing additional capital, helping create sustainable, open competition in these countries that we think will be in their long-term interests. We obviously are interested in pushing things on countries that they're not interested in. We want to always take into account their interests and their openness. And we need to find partners from the private sector who we can act with. I think this is the alternative that we're meant to offer. We're never going to be able to meet dollar for dollar what our strategic competitors are doing in the developing world. But I think we have a better product in the end of the day, one that over the long term will really be beneficial for them.
Thank you for that, Scott. With that answer, I'm going to pass to my colleague, Rama Yaj. Rama, over to you.
Thank you very much, Fred. It's my pleasure to jump in this conversation. So happy to be a part of this exchange of views. Congratulations, Mr. Nathan, for your appointment at the head of the DFC. Thank you for accepting our invitation during this spring meetings. So now we are going to jump into African matters because when we come to development, we come to Africa. Since your appointment, like you said, and like our president said, the international context has tremendously changed with the Russian invasion in Ukraine. Do you share the fears expressed by a few actors of development, according to whom the urgent situation in Ukraine could lead to a decrease of fundings at the expense of the developing world, especially Africa. How can we avoid that?
Well, nice to meet you, and thank you for the opportunity to talk today. You know, I think your point is a very important one. In any sort of crisis, the first order effects are horrible, but the second and third order effects that you highlight are the ones that we really need to also be focused on. I don't anticipate that there will be a loss of focus, and I can tell you on the part of DFC that we have no intention of losing focus on the developing world, even while trying to find solutions for Ukraine. You know, as we discussed a moment ago with Fred, you know, if you think about food insecurity and vulnerable food systems around the world, it's clear that there's going to be a direct impact of this crisis in the developing world. You know, we're doing what we can on that. You know, building on the exposure, we already have invested millions of dollars in the last year. This was a focus for us. We looked in agriculture, food security sector, and projects related to that in Africa, and we intend to continue to do that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nathan. As you may know, at the Africa Center, we tried to promote a more optimistic narrative about Africa. That's why we really think this continent is strategic. It's the oldest continent, the youngest continent, and soon the largest population in the world. So, and when we say the youngest continent, we think of digital transformation of the continent. We think of innovation. And over the recent years, Africa has become a productive ground for entrepreneurs and startups. That's the home of the biggest digital revolution in the world of these last 2 decades, with a phenomenal impact on the activities of classic enterprises. The most technologically advanced countries like South Africa, Nigeria, or Kenya host the leading e-commerce companies in Africa. How can the US International DFC support scientific, digital, and tech issues through automation, robotics, big data, biotech, artificial intelligence, you know, as levers for growth and development, regarding the role they could play in a future economy of transformation for the long term?
It's a great question, and it's a high priority for us. As I think I mentioned, closing the digital divide, information communication technology investment is a cornerstone of President Biden's P3W initiative, and it's a top priority for us here at DFC, and that includes, and even I would say, is highlighted in Africa. You know, there's no question about the mass adoption of internet, of smartphone technology throughout Africa. But there is a gap about some of the infrastructure that goes along with that. You know, according to our work, Africa accounts for less than 1% of the total data center capacity in the world, despite the mass adoption of the technology and the importance, as you point out, to economic development. So we're working with a partner called African Data Centers to finance their build out and expansion of the data centers throughout the continent, South Africa, Kenya, and some of our other DFC eligible countries. This is the kind of thing that is hugely leverageable as that infrastructure is built locally. It helps everything from the financial sector to the high-tech innovation and startups that you mentioned, but even agriculture, going back to that point, it's really critical to be able to have that kind of local infrastructure built out, and we're highly supportive of that.
Yeah, speaking of agriculture and all these issues, you know that the African tech, which is different from the Western tech companies, the African tech is really committed in development matters. African startups invest in agriculture, in education, in health, in climate change. And that's what I would like to raise now, the climate change issue. I know that it's one of the most important priorities at the DFC. And the next COP will take place on the African continent, in Egypt, COP 27. Everybody hope that it won't be a blah blah, like Greta said about Glasgow, because for Africans, Glasgow was a failure. They were even put on a red list because of COVID. And beyond that, 4% of the gas emissions are produced on the African continent, but Africans pay the highest price. For them, the global warming is not a threat, but it's a daily reality. But they are not victims. They bring solutions. We know that there is one country in the world that respects the Paris agreements. It's an African country. It's Gambia. So, given the fact that the Biden administration and the DFC have prioritized climate change in their action, there is one point of concern from Africa. It is this decision to defend gas. They see gas in Africa as a transitional energy. For Africans, the choice is not between fossil and renewable, but between electricity and death. So do you think, and particularly in this context with the Russian gas that is not available anymore, do you think that you could change your priority on gas, or should you keep your priorities like you decided 1 year ago?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to. You know, we have prioritized projects that help both on mitigation and adaptation for climate. That obviously includes deep investments in Africa and elsewhere in the world in renewables, but it goes well beyond that. But I'd also say, you know, we should look at what we've done in the last year. We invested in 2021 in Sierra Leone in a gas combined cycle power generation facility. Sierra Leone has one of the lowest levels of electricity penetration in the world. Our project, when it comes online, will be equivalent to 25% of the current generating capacity in that country. Will help not only people on a residential level have reliable and sustainable access to electricity, but it helps economic development. I mean, that's really the point that I think you're making, that access to energy is a critical component to development. And we want to find ways that are clean and sustainable to do that. But we've not taken anything off the table. We're very open to the idea of highly developmental projects that make a difference in people's lives, that help put the economies on a more sustained and steeper path to economic development, and access to energy is a critical part of that.
Thank you, Mr. Nathan, for this important answer. I think that many of our African audience will be happy to hear that. And when we speak about climate change, we go to health, of course. And unfortunately, the effects of the COVID-19 are still there, impacting the economies. Last month, the DFC joined a consortium of 9 development partners to support BioVac's expansion of its existing vaccine manufacturing plant capacity and enable the production of Pfizer COVID vaccine and other vaccines. BioVac plans to raise around $150 million to boost increased local vaccine manufacturing capacity across the African continent. My question is, what will be the DFC role in this important projects?
Well, I should just pull back and say generally, the DFC was able to pivot after the pandemic started to really put effort and money behind making sure that we could find ways to address the COVID-19 crisis, primarily through more distributed vaccine manufacturing in the developing world. That includes Africa. We have investments in South Africa and Senegal, and we're going to continue to work on other investments that could help with local production of vaccines. We work very closely with Gavi and COVAX to help them mitigate risks and overcome financial hurdles for governments that are funding their vaccine purchases through these facilities. And this is a high priority for us. We've put more than $1 billion in the last year into projects related to this and continue to work on a full range of projects, not just for this current pandemic, but in order to increase health capacity and resilience for whatever future health crisis has come down the pike. I mean, we need to be ready for the next crisis. And I'd say even more generally, healthcare is one of the pillars of the B3W initiative that goes beyond crisis response to making sure that people have access to healthcare with good medical equipment, diagnostics, therapeutics, even issues like clean water and good nutrition, which are a cornerstone to good healthcare.
Thank you. Thank you for these very interesting thoughts. Now we have just, I think, 3 minutes. So I would like to, I mentioned earlier, important countries like Nigeria, Kenya, or South Africa. There's a very, these economies are more and more powerful with a high level of growth. I'd like to ask you more broadly, in your visits on the African continent, what countries have impressed you the most for their ability to grow and to tackle the development issues?
Well, thanks for that question, but I will point out I've been in the job for, I think, 8 weeks. So I don't have an answer to that because I have yet to travel to Africa. It's a high priority for me, and I'm hoping to do so very soon. But I think I'll withhold judgment on the question. I do think more generally, I am very interested in addressing the particular issues that exist in individual countries throughout Africa, rather than thinking about it as a whole. Of course, there are continent-wide issues, but I do think we work with actual individual transactions, with actual individual partners in markets. And so we need to be very focused on all of the particularities and differences that exist and make sure that we're addressing the needs and the opportunities in individual countries, over 50 countries. So, I find it hard to generalize, and I'm also not going to play favorites at this point.
Right. Africans always complain about the general views about the continent and appreciate these kind of differences. You're absolutely right. Another question, you stressed earlier that the DFC is a young organization, and you're right. Since 2 years now, I mean, beyond your own action since the beginning, what is, according to you, what is the major success of the DFC and maybe the US policy to Africa since 2 years?
I think just the idea of the DFC is the success. And I don't want to pick out one project or another. We've funded funds that are working in multiple countries and looking at sectors. We've funded large-scale infrastructure projects. We have funded financial inclusion and projects that help women entrepreneurs and help small and medium enterprises. So we're doing a full array. We even do political risk insurance that helps unlock more private capital in particular situations. So we're across a wide range of sectors, wide range of products, and all over the continent. But it's really this idea of the DFC that we're leaning forward, focused on the places where we can really advance the development objectives of the United States as rapidly as possible, focused on the poorest countries, but looking for those places where bringing in more private sector capital provides an alternative, an open, sensitive to environmental and social issues, an alternative that's sustainable and makes real impact. That's what I'm proud of and what I'm looking to do in my tenure here, to find more projects like that, more transactions that have real impact on people's lives.
Thank you very much. I have just a last question, because I know it's time to conclude, but I cannot avoid that important question for the future. It seems that a US Africa Leaders Summit will be held in the next months. So what are your, if you can answer that question, what are your expectations from the US Africa Leaders Summit?
Well, I think it would be me stepping out of my place as the CEO of DFC. I think that's the kind of question that probably should be addressed to my State Department or National Security Council colleagues. I'll just say that if there is Africa US Leaders Summit, I very much look forward to all the events that would go along with it. The opportunities to interact with CEOs and other business leaders, our partners in the development finance community, and obviously ministers and political leaders from throughout the continent. So
thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
We'll watch that. So thank you very much, Mr. Nathan. We have appreciated to have you. You have been very inspired by your thoughts and views. We were very curious of listening to you. It's your first step in your new role, so we wish you all the best for this all the commitments you have for you and your team. And be sure we are here to be a partner for the DFC, so like all the council. So thank you very much for your participation today, and see you soon.
Well, thank you, Ambassador, and I want to also thank Fred and all the Atlantic Council for this opportunity. Thanks for putting it on and for inviting me. Thanks so much.